Hello everyone, welcome back. Yeah, last persons. Welcome back. My name is Arjan Post and I'm happy to introduce the next speaker, Frans Saris, who is a physicist. He was a professor of physics at Utrecht and Leiden University. And for many years he was a researcher and then director of the FOM Institute for Atomic and Molecular Physics, which was under a new name still is part of the Dutch Research Council, NWO. Frans Saris has written regularly columns for Dutch newspapers, NRC Handelsblad and De Volkskrant, and writes essays, among others, for the cultural monthly De Gids, The Guide, I would call it, and for the Nederlandse Boekengids, who take pride in translating it into the Dutch Review of Books. Frans Saris will talk about a fourth regime, an expression that several of you may recognize. For Johan Goudsblom, this concept still was accompanied by a question mark, and we are very keen to hear what Frans Saris has to say about it. If I may invite you.
Thank you very much. Probably one of the last meetings that I had with Joop when he was already very weak. I brought him a newspaper with an interview, and the headline of that interview read, "We will never know it for sure." And I showed it to Joop and I said, "Now you will finally agree with me." And Joop said, "That depends." What you mean by it? Joop and I used to meet every last Monday of the month for the past 40 years. We were both members of a discussion group of professors from all the different faculties, about a dozen together. And we would use this discussion group to discuss with each other our own work in the making. Thus, we were present, we were his sounding board when he wrote Fire and Civilization in different sections before it went into the Gids and then into a book. I will talk about the other book that he published 20 years ago. It was already mentioned, Mappe Mundi, Humans in Long-Term Socio-Ecological Perspective. When he had written about his three regimes extensively, together with Bert de Vries, and we suggested to him that he added one more chapter on the fourth regime. He refused. And I pressed on him and I said, "Come on, we should learn from you, from the history. What will the fourth regime be?" And then finally, after our pressure, he came up with a rather short paragraph that you can find back into the very back of that book. And that paragraph says, "Towards a fourth regime, question mark." Yeah. And he says, "We don't know." That's basically what he said in that last paragraph. Yeah. Since then, I've been working on him to convince him that that fourth regime is the sustainability regime. And have I convinced him? All I can say is that when the latest version of his Fire and Civilization, the new version in 2015 appeared by Van Oorschot, he told us during the presentation that he would have liked to have changed the title to Less Fire, More Civilization. Yeah. Okay. So the subject of my talk is towards the sustainability regime, without question mark. Because I think that our interdependence, our control of energy and matter, guided by information, Goudsblom's words, are well enough developed so that we can say that we are well on our way towards the sustainability regime. We aren't there yet, not completely, certainly not. There are rather large roadblocks. In fact, there are quite a few people who think that we are facing extinction. Extinction due to climate and energy crisis. Extinction due to the biodiversity and food crisis. Extinction because of peace and security crisis. I will argue that in every one of them, at least in the first two, we have sufficient control to claim that we are on our way to sustainability, and certainly to less fire and more civilization. So first, energy and climate. You know the problem. During the first two regimes of Joop Goudsblom, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere changed, but that was not due to us. It was due to the ice age changes. But as of 1800, in the third regime of Joop Goudsblom's, during the industrialization revolution, the CO2 emissions rose tremendously, and as you can see there, they skyrocketed, and in 2020, they reached well over 400 ppm. And as a result, our climate is changing dramatically. So this is what we face. We have done it, and now we have to do something about it. The good news is that there is a solution. The solution is that there is more than enough clean energy for Earth, for everybody on Earth, to have a good life. What you see here to the right are the known energy reserves from the fossil fuels and from nuclear. Those are those disks to the right. The main part of the figure is the yellow disk, and that is the solar energy that is available to us. Note that that solar energy is available to us every year. Whereas the other disks to the right, the fossil fuels, are the known reserves for all of us for the rest of our existence. We don't know of more reserves than those. So there is a tremendous amount there's an abundant energy available and clean as well. You see also on top of the yellow disks, the smaller disks in all the other renewables, wind, biomass, and others. Note that our energy use, the worldwide energy consumption, is no more than that smaller orange disk to the left. And if you want it there, the energy consumption in 2050, that's the other disk. So it may increase. It may even double compared to what we have depicted there. There is plenty. There is more good news. During the time that Mappe Mundi was written, and today, the price of solar electricity has dropped by almost a factor 1,000. And it will drop further. Today, it competes with gas-fired power stations. So the electricity that you get from your power company costs as much as the electricity that you get from your roof if you put solar cells on your roof. For 5,000 euros, you can put enough solar cells on your roof to have the electricity supply for the rest of your life, including for your car. No more than 5,000 euros, okay? There are quite a few Dutchmen who already know they better invest their money on the roof than in the bank. So, the problem is not the availability, or the problem is not that we don't have enough energy. The problem is that we have to have it available on the time we need it, when we need it, and where we need it. Science and engineers for the past couple of years have developed in the Netherlands an energy transition model. With this model, I have no time to go into the detail, but I have the reference for you. In this model, we can model the energy needs and the supplies of your home. We can model the energy needs and supplies of your village, of your city, of your province, of the country. That's the level of control over energy, matter, and information that we have in energy and climate. Is that enough? No, it's not. And Goudsblom, in the second version, the last version of his Fire and Civilization, said, next to the World Wide Web, we need the World Wide Energy Web. We need to connect the continents to have energy security, to have, as Joop said, the sun shine on us day and night, from east and west, and from north to south. Now, I have another important aspect to tell you here. We have developed, the same group that developed the energy transition model, we have developed the carbon transition model. And what we have modeled is, what we have in mind is, stop mining carbon completely. Stop mining fossil fuels completely. Then use what is available, all the carbon that is available today, that is in our biosphere, and recycle it. Can we do that? How can we do that? And that's what the carbon transition model shows. There's a very simple notion to tell you. We don't need to build a new worldwide energy web. It already exists. It was built by the oil and gas industry. We transport today, they transport today, energy all over the world. All we need to do is fill that system with synthetic fuels. Yeah? So instead of trying to connect South America to Australia with electricity, or through the Bering Strait with electricity, I don't think that will be ever reached. We don't need it. There are already oil tanks, there are pipelines that we use today for our transport fuels, for our heating fuels, for our chemical industry fuels, and we just use them to fill them by filling them with synthetic fuels. I give you two simple examples. You see here an artist view of Tata Steel here in IJmuiden, Velsen, the Netherlands. If we take the CO2 they emit, rather than letting it go into the atmosphere, collect it, we can make it react with water, and we have plenty of water, and use wind energy from the North Sea. We have, in the meantime, we have quite a few windmills there. And then we can convert this CO2 from Tata Steel into synthetic kerosene. Yeah? And synthetic kerosene is about the only way by which airplanes can fly sustainably. So we can supply sustainable fuel to Schiphol from the CO2 emissions from Tata Steel. How much? Half the planes of Schiphol of the year 2020, or 2019, I should say. There weren't that many. The last, before the pandemic, half the airplanes that took off from Schiphol Airport could have been filled with synthetic fuels from Tata Steel. Another example, if we would collect all the emissions from all the pipes, from all the heavy industry in the Netherlands, chemical industry, energy producers, aluminum factories, you name it, we would collect 500 million tons of CO2. We can convert that with renewable energy and water into methane, what we pumped out of Groningen the last decades. Yeah? And we would produce 50 megaton of methane. That is more than we have ever used for our own heating and our own chemistry, our own economy, including the export. So what I'm saying is that it is possible to close the circle if we stop mining fossil fuels. Close the circle and keep our business going. Now, I want to say a few words about the problems with food and biodiversity. The biologist Lowe and the anthropologist Herman have discovered a rather interesting analogy between plant diversity and language distribution. What you see here is that where it is black, you know already areas like the Amazon or New Guinea and Indonesia, parts of Africa, is the areas where most of biodiversity is. It is also the area where most of the small languages still exist. Now, I have learned from Bram de Zwaan that the small languages are suffering from English. English is where there are many small languages, there is English. Because the younger generation wants to communicate with more people, and therefore they learn as a second language, they learn English. And as a result, they forget or they lose their first language. And that's how English goes all over the world and destroys literally the cultural diversity of this world. Isn't there an analogy with the hamburger? In our globalized world, we have a menu that is globalized. We have many more, much larger diversity on our plate than we had 40 years ago. Yeah? But on the other hand, even the 3-star restaurants now have hamburgers on their menu. And that tells us something. I think it says that those people who have potatoes, rice, or pasta as their first food have a hamburger as their second food. And because of the nutritional value of that and the cheap, the low cost, it will overtake, and it is valuable to invest in hamburgers. And therefore, they drive away all the smaller food products. Yeah? So there is an analogy, I think, with Bram de Zwaan's words of the world and the hamburger taking over. The problem is, can we feed 10 billion people and still preserve the biodiversity? And there are people who say we should stop because the areas that are red, which are the areas with very poor diversity already, are growing all the time. And as a result, soon the whole world will be red. We should stop. And there is this half-Earth movement initiated by Ed Wilson, who recently passed away. But then is the question, can we feed 10 billion people, the population of the 2050, can we feed 10 billion people with half the Earth available only? We have, with the same group of people, science and engineers, we have developed the agricultural food nature transition model. We have started to calculate here. The model will be presented this month and made available online for free. One simple outcome is that the amount of arable land available on Earth, if you divide it by the total population, 10 billion people, you have the arable land today divided by 10 billion people, you have half a hectare available per person. Now, half a hectare per person is more than enough to feed the whole world population with vegetables and fruits. As soon as you put a cow on that hectare, it needs 2 hectares. One cow needs between 1 and 2 hectares. Yeah? So we cannot afford to eat the animal proteins. You knew that, but it comes out of our model too. Yeah? So we should dramatically change our diet, and we should try to refrain from this hamburger going through, taking over everything everywhere. That means, does it not mean nature control, social control, and self-control? This is our homepage for the circular agri-food nature transition model that will be published this month. And I think what we have learned is something that was already in Joop's books. Humans should learn not to live from, but in symbiosis with the Earth's biosphere. It's a hard problem to manage, but it is in principle possible. The next question is a sustainable regime possible without world peace? Is it possible to be worldwide sustainable so that we have this world energy system that I advocated, filled with synthetic fuels? We will certainly need a world food system, but we also need a local food system to be food secure. Yeah? Will it be possible without world peace? Some people think that we have had peace in Europe for the past 70 years. But we are at war, and not only in the Ukraine, and not only since Ukraine. We've been at war also since the Second World War. In, first, the Cold War. I have lived through the Cold War, and I know the pressure of that bomb above our heads, which we feel again now. But we have had a Balkan War. We've taken part in bombing Syria and Iraq. What I have done is simply gone to the website of our Department of Defense and taken from there, I've taken from there the missions of our military. Yeah? Our military is not in the Netherlands. It's not even within the European borders. It's not within NATO borders. This is where our army is. Iraq, Litouwen, Somalië, Bahrein, Strait of Hormuz, Gaza Strip, Israel, Kosovo, Syria, United Arab Emirates, Mali, Uganda, Afghanistan. That's where we are. Why do we think it's peace? Why don't we call it war? Well, simply because if we call it war, it would be against the agreement that we signed, also the Netherlands signed, in the period between the First and the Second World War. In this period, people thought, no more, no war anymore. And so they denounced the use of aggressive war. And it's now an international fallacy. It's an international criminality. And you can read about it today in a newspaper that Putin is accused of this aggressive war that he started. But we have been aggressive for the past 70 years in many different ways, following our allies from the United States. Barack Obama, who received the Nobel Prize, has been sending drones into 137 countries during his own period as president. So how do we change that? And do we need to change that? I think so. I think we do. So finally, I think that this is the biggest problem. There are quite a few people who help us to advocate. I think of Greta Thunberg. I think of Marianne Minnesma with the climate case. I think of David van Rijbroek, Rutger Bregman, Extinction Rebellion. I think of Frans Timmermans. But there is no social transition model. I have told you that there is an energy transition model, there's a carbon transition model, there is an agricultural, food, nature transition model. But you people are invited now to help us make a social transition model. And Joop Goudsblom wrote the most important message, I think, to us. Try to convince people that as much as their own personal well-being benefits from the well-being of one's own group, the well-being of one's own group benefits from the well-being of much larger social units, and ultimately of humanity as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 10 minutes now for some questions, and I see the first one.
Thank you. Wonderful talk and very stimulating. But I wonder, what is it that keeps us from doing these things you try to promote? What happens? Why doesn't it happen? Or at too low a scale, you know?
Yeah. You answer what is preventing us from doing what I advocate. For the first issue, climate, energy and climate, I know. For the other two, I don't know so much. So I will answer the first, and that is, we have been addicted to oil and gas, and our economy is heavily dependent on them, and we have been suffering from big oil telling us that it was no problem. So they have done everything, like the tobacco industry. They have done everything to tell us that we shouldn't worry about climate change. And it's only since the last couple of years that governments and even industries are convinced that something should be done about it. We haven't reached that stage in the other two areas yet. I hope we will.
So it doesn't fit the business model, the dominant business model.
Yes, so I think that the economic wars, the trade wars, are just as much wars as the military wars. Yes. And we should get away from them, if possible. And you know that better than I do.
Thank you.
Someone else?
I would like to suggest one thing. I think the main problem is that the world is still in the throes of great power conflict. I think Putin was faced with the fact that Russia could no longer be a great power. Its economic power is very little, much more little than people realize. But on different levels, power conflicts determine to a very large extent the reason why we can't cooperate in that sense. And I think I would like to have your opinion on that. It's something that's rather dear to my own thinking, but I would like to know what you think about it.
Well, I'm an optimist, and therefore I see the wonderful things that sometimes occur also. So we live in terrible times right now. It's awful what is happening now. Yeah, but have we not missed an opportunity when Gorbachev was there? Yeah, and he signed an agreement with Reagan, and lo and behold, the nuclear arms race was finished, stopped. Did we do enough at that time? Did we invite Gorbachev to come here and become a member of the EU? And if we had done that, would we be in this terrible situation that we are in now? Yeah? I don't know. Yeah? But I don't think you can say there are no opportunities. War is part of human nature and it will never die.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. No. But I know there are quite a few people who do think that.
Yeah, dear Mr. Saris, thank you for your interesting speech. I would like to point to your commentary that I think the quote was, there is enough solar energy available for each of us, even on the number of humanity if it reaches 10 billion. In that wording, I miss something, some kind of reflection that availability presupposes that you gather the solar energy by any technical means. You were mentioning the solar roofs. So indirectly, does it mean, that's my question, that the whole Earth surface is available and should be used by humans for their solar energy purposes and without considering other species? Yeah. I think it sounds a little bit speciesistic.
Yeah. The answer is, of course, no. But I think I have also indicated that the area that we need to supply the necessary energy is so small that it won't affect biodiversity. I talked about half Earth, yeah, for our whole economy and for the way of life we're having now. We don't even have Earth for our energy supply. Yeah? So I certainly don't want to cover the Sahara with solar panels. I certainly don't want to cover those green areas that you've seen in that picture. I cover the red areas that are already wasted, and certainly our roofs to begin with.
I think we have room for one or two more questions. Anyone?
Well, if there are no younger people who have priority in this matter, I would like to ask a question. In passing, you mentioned tobacco, and that I was fantasizing how that, after all, it took about 60 years to get the addiction to tobacco and the fantastic commercial interests behind it to somehow tame them. And nowadays, I refrain from smoking mostly out of shame towards my fellow human beings. So maybe we should very closely study how tobacco was banned in the West, because that is comparable with meat in the amount of money and power involved. If we could do it with tobacco, we can do it with hamburgers. Yes. We can even do it with fossil fuels. But how did we do it? I don't know how it happened with tobacco. We should have studies about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good comment. Thank you.
Question for Jason. That's not Jason. But it is.
Yeah, I have one question. I remember one documentary by I don't remember his name, but it's called The Planet of the Humans. And there they tried to show that some of the ecological answers were also ecological. So and one major issue they talked about was the conservation of energy, like batteries. That we can produce a lot of energy, but we don't have the possibility to store the necessary amount of energy. So we would need to produce it regularly. So I would like to know if maybe this is taken into account in your model.
Yes. We can recycle batteries, and it is taken into account. But batteries are not lithium-ion batteries are not the only way to store energy. We can store energy much more than we do today, because most of our cars, if you convert them to electric cars, the battery availability is enormous. We can fill those batteries because most of the cars are standing still. They are used for 7% of their time. That's in our model. But then to interconnect the countries, we need the other way of storing energy and convert it back into electricity again. So we use solar energy to convert CO2 into synthetic fuels. We use the synthetic fuels to create electricity again. That's circular. That's in our model. Thank you.
The final one for Jason.
Bram, just to pick up on your point about the tobacco industry, I did a study of the tobacco industry and of smoking and used a figurational perspective. And just a couple of things is we might think the tobacco industry is now fully rehabilitated. I was at a global tobacco forum, nicotine forum recently, and Philip Morris came onto stage and said, we are committed to a smoke-free future because they're developing smoke, heat not burn products, new kinds of novel nicotine technologies. But this is at exactly the same time as Philip Morris very aggressively promoting cigarettes in the developing world. It's a kind of cliche term. But one of the things that has got them to confront and finally face up to the addictive character of nicotine and to now actively pursue less harmful forms of sources of nicotine is shifting behavioral standards. And one of the decisive shifting moments, and this was my whole thesis, was when smoking became not just a private regarding vice that affected you, but it became something that affected other people as well. So you could no longer say, well, it's my right to be a smoker, it's my liberty, because your right to be a smoker took away someone else's right to be a non-smoker by virtue of secondhand smoking, passive smoking. And that was a decisive moment. But I do think, again, it comes back to this point. It is about the triad of controls. And I think if we're thinking about this kind of what next, something, and you can see it now, the arguments around meat, for example, and you've alluded to this, are not so much proceeding on the grounds of whether it's ethically the right thing to do to eat animals or not, but increasingly in terms of the carbon footprint of eating beef relative to other products. So it's just a few reflections, which I think just supports your arguments.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm an optimist, I said earlier, also because take the problems with the driving gases in our refrigerators and other insulating gases. they were done away with as soon as we understood we got skin cancer from them. And we were able, as a United Nations, to ban them in a relatively short time. Now, this gives me hope. Possibly the United Nations can help us to solve these problems. But they need Marianne Minnesma also. Thank you.